So this isn't going to be my usual hour-plus long retrospective sort of video. Today we're just looking at the game at a base level and talking about a few of the changes, if I enjoyed Code Vein 2, and if I believe it's worth trying out for yourself. Do not be concerned, the proper full-length retrospective review thing will release once the major DLC expansion comes out, and I've had time to do multiple playthroughs so I can cover the entire game at once. Now then, Code Vein 2 is a Souls-like action RPG. If Code Vein 1 was akin to Dark Souls, then Code Vein 2 is akin to Elden Ring, even in some ways that I'm not a fan of, but we'll get there. You're resurrected into a world filled with revenants, a fancy word for vampires, trapped on a totally screwed island in the future where most other living things have been turned into monsters called horrors. To stop the destruction of what remains, you and your gang of vampire buddies will travel back to various time periods to find and recruit the heroes that once saved the world, so you can murder them in the present before they explode. Don't worry about it, we're not dissecting the plot today. You'll hack and slash and loot your way through the world that remains, after spending way too long on the expanded character creator trying to get your design just right, getting tons of different weapons and skills, draining the ichor of the lost beings who once lived there to fuel your own powers, and riding your dope motorcycle around the open world like an idiot until you accidentally jump off a cliff that's just too radical for you and die. Despite having a 2 in its name, is this game even connected to Code Vein 1? Allegedly, no. The developers themselves have said this is a completely separate universe, and that does look to be the case. But if you get a chance, you should read through some of the weapon descriptions. There's some interesting wording in them. Still, if you haven't played the first game, you'll have no problem jumping into the sequel. Any ties to the first game are reference level at best. Code Vein 2 attempts to make a lot of improvements intended to address direct criticisms the original title often faced. And while I don't think every change worked out perfectly, I do think there's more hits than misses, and the game still feels like Code Vein on a moment-to-moment basis. The game still heavily revolves around skills and overblown special attacks. Your party members are a key part of the experience. The game encourages you to freely swap between various classes and weapons more than ever before to find playstyles you can mesh with. And the characters are as fully rounded as you could possibly want them to be. Code Vein 2 is more Code Vein. Over 50 hours more, for whatever that means to you. If you liked the first entry or were middling on it, or even if you're new to the series, I think you can find plenty to enjoy here. However, if you hated Code Vein 1, this is not going to change your mind. It is still, at its core, very much the same sort of game with similar combat and systems. So you know where I'm coming from. I'm someone who just a few months ago made an hour-and-a-half video about how Code Vein is one of my favorite games ever, so yeah, I'm probably coming in a little biased here. I've been absolutely addicted to Code Vein 2 since its early release a few days ago, and if I didn't have work to do, I'd still be playing it right this moment. That's the short of it, if you were just looking for a quick rundown. But now I'm going to talk a bit more about how the game has changed and been added upon since the original. Don't worry, there will be no spoilers in this video. I am only showing gameplay and bosses from the first 2 areas, and won't be showing any cutscenes with big character or plot reveals. Of course, the first thing you'll notice in a game is how it looks. Code Vein 2 is a good-looking game. Nothing mind-blowing, but certainly more detailed and better animated than the first title. The lighting especially carries a lot of it. The new day-night cycle looks amazing when you catch it at the right angles. The characters are more stylized, with exaggerated limbs and large glassy eyes, and what I can only describe to you as a creepy doll aesthetic. I'm all for it as I feel it fits the sort of vampire, goth, punk, whatever kind of vibe the game's going for. The only aspect of the style that bugs me is the necks. Everyone has a really long neck, which isn't inherently an issue, but it looks like they were placed and animated separately from a model's shoulders, so I end up feeling like I'm pre-ordering Advanced Warfare.
Copy that.
There is an aspect of the presentation that would feel misleading if I didn't tell you about it, though. The performance. Code Vein 2, at least on my base PS5, is not an incredibly stable game. While most indoor dungeons hover around 50 to 60 FPS, the more open areas throttle up and down near 30 most of the time. I'm not a stickler for frame rates. My favorite FromSoft game also runs at a consistently awful frame rate, so the game's stability never really affected my gameplay in any way. I know some people are more sensitive to frame rate stuff than I am, so I wanted to mention it, but it didn't impact my experience whatsoever. Onto the gameplay, almost every aspect of the combat in Code Vein 2 has been tweaked to address some oversight or complaint about the first game. I don't want to dive into everything, that's for the full video, but let me list off a few notable changes. There are a lot of smaller adjustments. Just for one example, the bayonet class weapons now consume purchasable bullets of different types rather than Ichor, a resource akin to MP, which was a major weakness of bayonets in Code Vein 1. It was often better to spend your Ichor on long-range spells than plink away at enemies with your gun, though bayonets now have clip sizes and have to reload to compensate for these changes. Onto larger alterations, skills are now bound to your weapon rather than your class. Weapons each have their own default arts, some of which are unique to that weapon, but you can still manually set which gifts that armament has from all of your earned skills at any checkpoints. Blood Veils, which were your single piece of defensive equipment in the first game, have been split in half. You now have a defensive forma, which alters your protective action, be that guarding, parrying, or dodging, as well as a Jail, which determines what special Ichor draining attack you can use to refill your energy. A third branch was added to your equipment, known as Bequeathed Forma, which are rare special weapons with unique uses and effects, like a giant axe that does lingering AoE damage, or my go-to, a bow and arrow that can be aimed over the shoulder to take out sniping enemies or draw aggro of a specific enemy from a distance. While equipping all these murder tools, you'll want to keep an eye on your stats, as they've added depth to the usually despised concept of stat-locked gear. I hate when I'm playing a Souls-like and I go through the trouble of playing a secret area to get a super weapon and my build simply cannot use said weapon without completely respecking all of my stats from scratch using some limited item just to try it out. Code Vein 2 solves this by adding the Burden system. Every blood code, which is your class, has 6 main stats. This bar represents the current burden your gear is placing on that stat. If the burden exceeds the power of that stat, you can still use that gear, but you'll become overburdened in that category. The higher the discrepancy, the more severe the burden effect becomes. This is not automatically a bad thing. Each of the 6 stats has a different effect that triggers when overloaded. For example, strength will buff your close range moves, but will cost extra stamina if you don't land your hits. Purposefully becoming overburdened is one of my favorite new mechanics, and coupled with the fact that some equipment has special effects that only activate when certain stats are stressed, it adds a lot of fresh build options. Even with that whole new system taken into account, partners are probably the biggest reworked feature in Code Vein 2. If you're unaware, unlike most Souls-likes, Code Vein allows you to bring a consistent party member with you at nearly all times. This caused some balance problems in the original game, as some people viewed the ally characters as too helpful and that they ruined the potential challenge of some bosses, while other bosses were made far too difficult for solo players because they were seemingly balanced around playing as a duo. Code Vein 2 decides to split the difference and even out partners in a few ways. First, your party member doesn't do real damage to enemies. Their damage is represented by this white bar. Now, if they reduce an opponent's HP to 0, that opponent will still die, but most enemies can easily regenerate this lost health if you don't keep pressure on them yourself to turn it into permanent damage. This obviously discourages you from just sitting back and hoping your partner fights everything for you. You do have to participate at least a bit to win. The second main switch up is that heart on your back. That's how you sync with your companions, and with the press of a button, they can merge themselves into you, giving special enhancements depending on the character. In fact, some of your party members can only assist you like this. Granted, for one of them, it's because they're just too lazy to physically fight. This is not only a good strategy option for certain situations, but helps to keep the fairness when fighting against stronger enemies if you're someone who doesn't like the idea of having someone assist you during battle. You can forgo the help of an extra body on the field, but still get some extra power-ups to support you so you don't feel like you're being nerfed or cheated. And finally, your partner cannot revive you by using the health exchange gift. Instead, they will automatically give you their strength to get back up if you down, removing themselves from the battle for a while and being unable to heal you again or participate at all until they can regenerate their own energy and respawn. And linked from those party members are another rebalanced mechanic, blood codes, which, in case you forgot, are essentially your classes, with each one having its own base stat distribution and traits. They're now directly given a letter rank based on their usefulness, allowing for a more deliberate progression. Previously in the first game, it seemed there was an attempt to make most of the codes around the same strength, which resulted in tons of blood codes that were worthless because there are only so many ways to distribute stats. So if a code had particularly high strength or something, it would have pathetically low defense or carry weight or something, even late in the game. These sorts of limitations were a source of one of my only serious complaints about Code Vein 1, which was how difficult it is to just increase your raw stats on multiple New Game Plus runs, because most upgrades that you collect were alternate options rather than strict upgrades. While we're still on blood codes, this next part is very important for me to tell you because from what I've seen, a handful of people don't even know this mechanic exists. Every time you master a blood code, you can go back to the base and talk to your big boss lady where she'll extract a new passive booster from said code. So the game still rewards you for using as many classes as possible. And I say still rewards you because most gifts, which are now called Forma, are no longer collected from mastering blood codes, but are rather earned from exploration and quests. So let's talk about how that's been expanded. The non-violent ways you interact with the world have also shifted considerably. Barring a single path at the very start of the adventure, Code Vein 1 was an entirely linear game. Areas would open up one at a time and the narrative played out in sequence. Code Vein 2 is open world now, with a more lenient primary quest line split into 3 chapters, and a bunch of mini dungeons and bosses strewn about to fill the space. I am very wary of linear experiences being turned open world and think it often hurts more than it helps. I'd almost always rather have a tightly constructed, straightforward adventure. However, I believe that Souls-likes are an exception to this rule. Because of the game's difficulty, how intense battles can be, and how punishing and frustrating dying at the wrong time is, I think it's to the game's benefit to have these sorts of cooldown periods where you can look around, practice moves and Forma synergy on weaker enemies, and find ways to slowly make yourself stronger to be better prepared for the more structured dungeon and boss areas. To help in your leisurely globe-trotting, you're given a motorcycle after completing the tutorial that can be instantly summoned pretty much anywhere outside. It even has a gliding function to reach distant areas or fall safely down large cliffs. Jumping has also been added, which means not only do the levels finally have decent verticality and layering that isn't just endless ladders to descend and climb, but there is now platforming in many places, and I never say no to 3D platforming. And there is plenty to find with these new movement options. Extra dungeons, skills, weapons, ingredients for crafting items, even vital upgrades like the materials you need to increase your healing can often be found in the middle of nowhere off the main roads. Each region of the map is also dotted with Pathos artifacts, these red orb statues that you can pray at to get buffs that apply whenever you're in that section of the world. Code Vein 2 is pretty open. I haven't had time to test this on every quest personally, but it seems that when the game gives multiple objectives, you can theoretically go to whichever you like. I switched between different main and side quest lines a few times and was never really stopped from doing so. They do try to warn you and slow you down so you don't get the misconception that you're all powerful and free though. There are a few different boss level horrors just stalking about on the roads, like these Watcher enemies that are not only immensely powerful, but also fire a trillion impossibly long range, sometimes exploding projectiles until you manage to get very far away and behind cover. So you still need to be alert when wandering around, as there are things bigger and badder than you out there. I gotta stop myself, because I keep going into all sorts of details and additions that I appreciate and think are worth talking about, but I don't want this to go on too long today. Although, I do want you to be able to make an informed decision on if this game is for you. So let me end off here on the negative aspects of the game that did genuinely bother me, because there are 2 main ones. The first is the bosses, and I know this is going to be a contentious subject. I know that bosses are a very debated and contested topic with the Souls-like crowd. What makes a good boss? What's considered cheap and annoying? What's just an old-fashioned get-good moment? But this is where the Elden Ring influence stops being a completely positive thing. Code Vein 2 does suffer from reusing mini-bosses and the optional dungeons multiple times, an issue Elden Ring really suffered from as well, but a little reused content can be pushed past. My issues arise more from the larger enemies themselves. Let me describe a main story battle to you and tell me which boss this sounds like. Most of this boss's attacks are all AoE swings that can hit you even if you aren't anywhere near the front of their body. This boss has 2 to 3 multi-hit combos that have tons of movement and tracking, delayed/staggered swings, and the amount of hits in each combo can change without warning to punish panic dodging or rolling into the boss, causing you to lose half your health if you misread and get hit by any of these attacks. The boss is unceasingly aggressive and will usually charge at you if you attempt to back up for even a second to heal or use an item before you can even finish the animation. And the second you get any opening or put any pressure on this boss, they will leap away from you to the other side of the arena and start the whole cycle over again. Bonus points if they start whipping projectiles at you. This isn't even a clever bit, you know where I'm going with this. It's a bunch of the bosses in Elden Ring, and that design philosophy has been adopted into Code Vein 2. Not as frequently. There are only maybe 4 or 5 bosses like this in a 50-hour game, including mini-boss types. But every time this happened, all I could think was the 80+ hours I spent playing Elden Ring. I'm not saying these are objectively bad traits for an enemy to have, but I do not find them entertaining. I know that memorization and finding openings and patterns is part of the appeal of this genre for some people. That's why you have people beating the game with a DDR mat made out of a potato with their tongue. I get it. But dodging through a giant enemy's 6-hit sweeping tracking combo that ends with an explosion just to get 2 sword swings in and then go right back to dodging is not something I look forward to. It's not even the actual combos themselves, it's the repetition of dodging the combo over and over a dozen times while you whittle away at their health with light attacks and the tiny openings. But, like my opinion on Elden Ring, occasionally annoying boss designs don't drag the game down too hard for me, because the bosses are the part of Souls-likes I care about the least, as weird as that sounds. The levels and atmosphere and making character builds and discovering the world and just fighting enemies are the parts that suck me into these games. I loved exploring the open world parts of Elden Ring, and I love it in Code Vein too, even if some of the progress blocking wardens are kinda dickheads. And while I'm talking about the difficulty, I think that leads to my second and final significant negative for Code Vein 2. A change that will certainly make the journey harder, especially for less skilled players this go around. The removal of co-op. I was very clear in my previous video that co-op was a huge part of Code Vein. It's obviously more enjoyable to play with a friend, but it also added depth to your setup and party composition, being able to split enhancement spells and attacks between the two of you, one person being a tank while the other cast magic. It was a great time. So I can't lie that I was totally bummed when I heard multiplayer was axed. Of course, I can imagine the reasons. Code Vein 1 had a lot of pre-release problems and a giant year-long delay that seemed to be related to its multiplayer somehow. So they probably just wanted to focus on the base game, but it is my single largest complaint about the game, and I know at least 2 people personally who aren't buying the game because they can't play with friends like the first one. Maybe have it launch alongside that big DLC you guys got planned? It's a shame because, as I said, no co-op is my only extreme gripe with the game. I love everything else, and if I didn't have to start working on the Boo's Fury video, I would hop straight into a New Game Plus run and just keep going. I know there's gonna be a lot of people who don't like this game, because there were tons of people who didn't like the first game either. It's been a punching bag of the Souls community for years. But whatever, I had fun with both of them. Like I said, Code Vein 2 is just more Code Vein. More places to explore, more characters, more weapons, skills, class building options. I didn't need some huge reinvention. I just wanted more of one of my favorite time wasters with some new bells and whistles thrown on. And that is exactly what I received. Hey everyone, this video is sponsored by no one today. Well, I guess technically it's sponsored by me, but it's not sponsored by an external company this time. If you're interested in my more heavily edited retrospective review type videos, there is over 2 hours of additional reviews over on my Patreon as we go through and cover as many Mega Man spin-offs as I can get my hands on. I just uploaded an hour-long video looking at Mega Man X Dive and also ranking all of its characters. So if any of that is something you might be interested in, head over to patreon.com/TaniJohn and join the $2 a month major of Team Colonel tier to get access to these videos as they release, as well as vote on the poll to decide which games we'll cover next. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel as always, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.